Thank you all for joining. We are hopefully going to have an interesting conversation around a very important policy subject, but it's also obviously very personal. You know, all of us think about the workforce in abstract terms, but it really does mean human lives, and it means 50% of the human race is a species called women, and obviously the topic chosen for today was No Women Left Behind. And I wanted to kick off the conversation was, No Women Left Behind is obviously a framing of the Marines, No Man Left Behind, which is a framing for war. And do you think that metaphor makes sense, Priya? Is this a war, no women left behind, or is that the wrong framing of it?
Well, I don't think it's a war, but I think for the overall development of an economy, of a society, we certainly need to make sure that women are not left behind in terms of the opportunities which are available to them and that they can access. But I would hesitate to frame it as a war, because war implies win-lose, war implies violence, none of which really are part of this and need to be a part of this discussion.
In what ways are they left behind? Priya.
I think, the way I look at it is that the ability to make, choices and have access to opportunities in line with one's desire and potential is the key thing that a society needs to hold itself, as the standard for, right? I think even today, there are, a few things that come, when you're looking at women participation in the workforce, right? The first, obviously, is the traditional gender-based roles that women have played and continue to play even today, and there are enough research reports that talk about the fact that there's a disproportionately heavier amount of load on family responsibilities, etc., that women take up. So there's one part about traditional rebalancing to some extent, the traditional role-based, gender-based roles that women play. The second would be in terms of opportunities in the workplace. And, clearly, again, there's a lot of research that points to the fact that when you have, more flexible options, it leads to greater the ability of women to participate much more in the workforce. And the third would be in terms of an overall ecosystem, which is about, society in terms of policy, but equally in terms of, family support, spousal support, etc. So if you put all of these together, I think it's fair to say that if, women at an overall level and individually can perhaps achieve far more than where we are today as a society.
In your mind, in what ways are women left behind besides the three that Priya?
I actually disagree with one of the things that Priya said, Manish. I do believe that we should be in a warlike situation when it comes to women and the participation of women in the labor force. I don't think that enough is being done, and war is also a symbol of urgency. And it is also something that forces us to act upon at a faster pace. What we are doing right now, all the discussions, the policies, the reforms, they're excruciatingly slow. And all of this is because we are not in the war state, that we do not have a war room that would show the world, that would show the country that we need to do something now, something fast, to ensure that women get what they need to be independent, to be secured, and to become the breadwinner of the family. And I absolutely with Priya when she's talking about the cultural pressures. What are the factors that are really putting or keeping women behind? First and foremost, Manish, everybody agrees it's cultural and social. We come from a country where, while it's a country of goddesses, it's also a country where Ghungat Pratha is something that we are very proud of. While Ghungat is synonymous to purity and innocence and respect, but it is also synonymous or a symbol of restrictions. So we are talking about a woman here who's not allowed to show her face to strangers. How is she going to go out and work with strangers? How is she going to move from point A to point B? So all of this is creating a cultural impact on women across the country. And this has, as you are very well aware, right now the participation is at its lowest. Let's talk about the latest COVID times, right? In COVID, women took the brunt more than anybody else for the fact that she was expected to be perfect, that she will work from home, she will take care of domestic responsibilities, and she will be a productive employee. So how was she supposed to do this? She went ahead and quit the job. Again, cultural. So first would be cultural, second would be employers. I do believe that organizations, again, need to have war rooms, need to, on war footing, make policies that will ensure that women participation in their own house is higher. Only then will it be lifted across the country. And last but not the least, Manish, we need so many reforms in place. We need so many regulations in place. I mean, before independence, we had kings with British government that were ruling us. After independence, we have politicians who are the majority in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha that are making policies and regulations. I mean, men make policies for men. Who is taking care of women? Clearly, they are not. That's why we are looking at the number that we are looking at, which is alarming. So I think all of these three factors are reasons why women are left behind. And there is so much work that we need to do to ensure that they get equal opportunity on the table.
Well, let me come back to you on the culture question, because the challenge with cultural explanations are it's above our pay grade and it's hard to change. But we have created the world's largest democracy on the infertile soil of the world's most hierarchical society, right? India is the world's most hierarchical society, and people said we shouldn't. So we obviously have managed to do that. So if we have created the world's largest democracy on the infertile soil of the world's most hierarchical society, why haven't we raised women's labor force participation, or why haven't, or so are cultural explanations even useful, Munira? I mean, why are women still left behind? Is it a cultural explanation as Deval is suggesting, or is it a plumbing problem, or is it a regulatory problem, or what is going on here?
Manish, I think in my opinion, the decision and ability of women to participate in labor workforce is the outcome of both economic and social factors, both at household and macro level. Hence, we look at a combination of factors. However, if we look at the decade before, the drivers then included educational attainment problem, fertility rates, economic growth, urbanization. For that matter, even a social norm of the woman's presence in the public domain affected the outcomes. However, if we see little over last 2 decades, the labor market outcome for women have improved, largely due to the relevance in education, access, training programs, skill development. I think the challenge always remains to access better jobs, either start a business, encourage entrepreneurship, or even when we speak about a lot of advantage of the new market labor opportunities. So I think the problem largely revolves around 3 factors. The leaky educational pipeline that starts at an early age, especially in the fields of complex fields of science, engineering, technology, investments in reskilling and the policy development framework. And for that matter, one of the biggest factors, which is, usually when we talk about women progressing in the mid-careers, during their mid-careers, they often are offloaded and downloaded with responsibilities to take on with family commitments and breaks, which actually in the later part of their career becomes a disadvantage for their growth. So hence...
So how do we handle the child break? How do we handle the child break? Is there a solution to the child break? Because almost all economists would suggest that the child break is a big explainer of the differential trajectories, and so you cannot have children. Angela Merkel said that she didn't have children because she wanted to be chancellor. So I think that so is there a solution? Maybe you can, Priya, you can go. Is it because go?
I think that, the one thing that organizations should look at is to be able to create gender agnostic, flexible policies for, all their people, right? And I'm very clear about the fact that it should be gender agnostic, because the more organizations create policies around flexibility and different employment contracts only for women, it perpetuates this whole gender-based traditional roles that women are expected to take, right? So one is, to clearly call out that these policies are gender agnostic and build a whole lot of flexibility around, work from home, work from anywhere, fewer hours, part-time hours, be open to a wide variety of employment contracts, right? So the moment you can do that, and the reason why I emphasize this is that it's very critical to keep women and men in the workforce. When people get offloaded or they decide to take a break for, family or caregiving for elders or whatever it may be, it's much more difficult to come back in. It's much easier if you've got that foot in the door, even if it is up, you're doing something with fewer hours, an outcome-based contract, or you're able to work from home or work from anywhere. And I think if there's one thing that organizations could do, it is this that needs to get a lot of emphasis. And I would emphasize that this has to be gender agnostic. We don't want to have the same kind of perpetuating of this belief that it's all the women who need to do that. We need to talk about the fact that men may take a flexible role for a few months while their children are small and the women come back. And today there are lots of couples who are doing equally well in the workforce. But whenever it comes to taking a back seat, more often than not, I see that changing a lot, but more often than not, it's still the woman who is expected to conform to those roles. So if there's one thing organizations can and should do urgently, it's to be open to a wide variety of employment contracts. It is to offer a high degree of flexibility, which is gender agnostic to the extent possible, where in terms of roles that are there. And most importantly, try very hard to see that you don't need to exit somebody completely, right? I mean, if one foot in the door can be, there, then that door will get kicked open on the basis of merit, sooner or later, right? So I would really look at it from that aspect.
Deval,
also to add to what Priya said, I think it's important where institutions, policymakers need to come together to have a roadmap. And this basically should focus on addressable career market options, key decision-making positions, growth, and a de-biased approach in growth, scale, and promotions. Also to look at scholarships, to sponsor higher education post-breaks, relocation cases, unemployment, and how can a woman look at a second inning, largely, when they opt for career breaks.
Deval, you want to disagree with Priya? It sounded like
I think Priya and Munira have resonated my thoughts, Manish, but I wanted to say it at a personal level for the fact that I took a break for 4 years before I rejoined the workforce. So for me, if I can make it happen, so can everybody. So I do believe that there is a lot of openness in the market now than it was 5 years back as to would you hire a woman who's taken a break after having a child? And I do believe that policies are evolving, they are changing, there's more awareness, but at the same time, going back to school is one of the best options, skill development, how do I upskill myself? These are the options that policymakers and organizations really need to think through. To ensure that that break doesn't become permanent for anybody, men or women, but more so on women.
But then how do you explain?
I do have one more provocative point to make as to what organizations should not do. And I think one of the things that organizations should try and refrain from is having quotas which are gender-based and particularly around women and women in leadership. And I say this for 2-3 reasons. One is, it perpetuates a belief that women are lesser and they need quotas to be able to move ahead. And there are unintended consequences of that kind of a belief system amongst women as well as their colleagues, right? I mean, you get a role on merit. You don't need, you don't want the noise around whether you got it because you're a woman or not, right? And there are unintended consequences of that, and therefore I've always, believed in, this is not affirmative action that we need here. We just need to make sure that there is an ecosystem that provides for more equity amongst, men and women. And for men, for all there may be men who will be saying, look, I want to spend more time with my child as he's growing up. I find a lot of men are talking about that. So quotas we should stay away from. but really creating an ecosystem that promotes everyone to be able to do their piece both at home and at the workplace is what we need to devote our attention to. Happy to have disagreements.
If you think that the problem, I mean, at least one of my professors at Wharton framed it as we're moving from glass ceilings to sticky doors. There's no cap on where women can get, but there are sticky doors, whether these are networks, whether they are this, then why wouldn't quotas help?
I think there are unintended consequences of a quota system. And I will talk about 2 or 3 that I have, seen and witnessed. One is it creates, rather than creating allies, it can create resistance amongst the organization. And it can also create a belief that if you believe that somebody has got the role not because of merit, but because of gender, it also leads to that person's ability to impact coming down, right? Because anything that he or she, if you had a quota for men as well, that anything that he or she says then is viewed not on its merit, but what does he or she know? I mean, they've got the job on a quota basis, right? So there's one unintended consequences of that. The second is a strong feeling amongst women that, we need quotas to be able to move ahead. We don't, and I think I remember a panel discussion I was a part in, and one of the ladies who was leading a D&I initiative in an organization said, well, if you had to choose only on merit and you had one man and one woman, you tell me whom you choose. I'd say go with merit. She herself believed that the woman would never get chosen on the basis of merit. So, some of these unintended consequences, I think, are very important to think through.
Deval, you sort of felt quotas might help, right? I think they may have helped at the board level, having, I know some of our directors get irritated in being called the women director. They prefer to be called the director who is a woman, but they may have helped at the margin, right? But you seem to think they might help at the margin. So why don't you, counter Priya's worry about the unintended consequences of almost legislating a belief that this is needed?
Manish, for me, quota is not a negative word. It actually, for me, is a metric. It's a goal. I actually believe that that's how you have to look at it. While if an organization decides that by the year end I need to be at 30% women employees, then you can call it quota if you want to, but you can also call it a metric or a goal. And I think the way you look at every application, the way you are keen to ensure that you've looked in every nook and corner to ensure you've hired a woman, your perception changes, your strategy changes, the way you are going to go about to get that done also changes. And every big thing required a firm push at the top. Every big thing. If it was that easy, if it was that simple, why are we here after 74 years? Why is there always a 30%, a 25%, a 22%, and now a 19%? Clearly, some of us are not taking it seriously. Clearly, organizations are not putting enough effort, enough policies, enough strategies to ensure that more and more women are hired across all levels. That's why I firmly believe that quotas do help. While it is a little, it might not be correct because you're being emphatic about it. It sounds more like a dictatorship kind of a concept, but it is something that I do believe, just the way I believe that we are in a warlike situation when it comes to women's participation. I do believe that it calls for quota system for the betterment of the society and for the women.
Munira, is it quotas are medicine or poison?
I think, Manish, while it will not be right to comment whether these are medicines or poison, but I think it takes me back to the same thought, saying that we have made a mindset where there are certain areas suitable, comfortable for the male, and then there are certain areas suitable and comfortable. Like, for example, if you go to the early stages of choosing a career or choosing a field in education, I think mathematics, science, technology have always been dominated and thought about being male, easy players and not kind of too favorable for the women workforce. I think that's where right in the early stages, most of the females do intend to kind of step up into these programs, but eventually they drop off. So if you look at making right from the beginning a choice, or rather dividing the two genders between giving them a comfortable space and something which is meant for the other person, you always tend to take the easy route. So I kind of believe that quotas really don't help. But however, they are not a poison. In certain cases where the conditions are understated, then you definitely need quota at the entry level, at the mid segment, to kind of help.
So that I think culture, as people, as Charu has pointed out in the comments, that culture is sort of hard to change, and I'm not sure, because it is hard to change. There are cultural explanations for India's poverty, right? The British Empire was justified on that, and that, though that is at best the soft bigotry of low expectations, and at worst it is racism, right? So I worry about cultural explanations, but there's very little we can do about it. But let me go into, there has been a lot of action, right? There has been the women's quota for directors, there has been the POSH, there has been maternity leave. There are different kinds of reform, and in my mind I always classify flick of pen reforms as distinct from institutional reforms, which are distinct from capacity reforms. But let's spend a little time on flick of pen reforms. So net, do you think POSH, maternity leave, or legislative changes that have been made, Priya, have they helped? Or are there any other legislative changes that could help? But have these particular, has policy as written, maybe POSH, maybe 6 months paid maternity leave, are these helping?
I clearly think so, Manish. I think POSH is a very important legislation. We need to ensure that workplaces are safe, and that I think is clearly an extremely good piece of legislation. There's a lot of awareness building that we do in organizations around that, so that's really good. I think there was a worry about whether maternity leave would be seen as an additional cost. And sure, there may have been better ways to do it in terms of offsetting some of the costs that organizations incur on that. But I think overall industry has moved on, from there. People accept it. They also realize that whether it is men or women, people can attrite, quite rapidly. And so the discontinuity, I have heard a lot of leaders say that at least when it comes to maternity leave, it's more planned. I have sudden attrition, which sometimes really knocks me back much more than a planned maternity leave, right? So I think those are important legislations. I frankly, I'm not in the space where I think more legislation around this would help. I can't think of, one more piece that I said, okay, if this was there as a legislation, it would be great. But I think, much more work for organizations to be more flexible. I'm going on about it like a broken record, because I think that's the one thing that can dramatically, shift women's participation, women's ability to stay in the workforce. Your whole need to do second careers will not happen if a person hasn't had to exit completely altogether, right? And make that available, themselves. Gender agnostic does not create equality. Somebody has put that in the chat, this thing, I agree. But it at least does not perpetuate a mindset that it's only the woman's job to, take care of the family and children and so on. So I really am not thinking more on the legislation line at this point in time.
So Deval, Sophia Bapna, she's a professor at University of Minnesota. She used some of our data and concluded that the 6-month maternity benefit was actually leading to some discrimination for young women. Because if at the margin you were taking people and there was some discrimination, so that was an unintended consequence, because companies couldn't pay for it, or small companies certainly couldn't pay for it. It's not like big companies were. So what is your view on legislative solutions to making the workplace more inclusive for women?
Manish, is it incredibly important to have them in place? Absolutely. Are they getting executed well? There I would have a question mark. Because the way you look at legislation is how you want to look at it, right? So, again, it goes back to the same thought word that do I need to do it? Do I have loopholes or ways to not have to do it? So absolutely, I do believe that all of these legislations have, in a way, in some places worked against women. The fact that I would have to shell out more money to take care of a woman when she is on her maternity leave. I have to think about the continuity. I'll have to think about, again, upskilling her, reskilling her. I'll have to get her back into the zone. Will she come back? Won't she come back? All of these questions are very normal and understandable for any employee. And if you are a large MNC, you can still figure out solutions. You can still put in those costs and those hours and take it on you. But if you're a small startup, if you're a small employer, if you're a small business, are you going to be able to do that? Not really, right? So I do believe that I would take these legislations, while they're incredibly important, with a pinch of salt. There are ways around it. Have they worked for women? Yes. In some organization, in some places, I do believe they've made a difference. But again, Manish, everything is moving excruciatingly slow. We really need to set a war room. We really need to understand the importance and urgency of gender equality. You said it yourself, 50% of this world is women. So what are we really doing about it? So yeah, this would be my take on it. Important, but not being executed at the level that it should be.
Munira, do you think at the margin in the tech industry, which you follow closely, or even in others, do you think the 6-month maternity leave, which is the highest in the world for any country, and it is fully paid by employers, do you think at the margin that has changed incentives or skewed incentives, or it actually is a great thing?
I think, Manish, in my opinion, it's definitely a great thing. And in fact, I kind of would like to take a shift from what Deval said, that whether played or kind of set up organizations would be able to do it, but will the new entrants or the startup companies would be able to do it? I think, in my opinion, in India today, from the new startups, the new entrants, they are far more careful. They are far more approachable in their kind of workspace for women, because they are very clear right from the beginning to kind of have these practices. So hence I feel that for them to have this kind of an inclusive workforce, to kind of create an environment which is more supportive of women, I don't think it's a challenge for them, and it is well practiced. It's in the benefit. In fact, if you look at the trend, investors, in women-led tech startups or any kind of startups put on a more bet as compared to other startups. So I think it has helped a lot, whether we talk about maternity benefits, whether we talk about POSH, or we talk about any kind of additional incentivization, that are there meant for the gender diversity ratio. They have empowered women. For that matter, it creates at least a lot of noise around what is available, to what extent we utilize. That's the awareness that we need to bring in. So it's all available, it's
so
there.
Then why?
But I
so
think
then why are
the practice?
Why are only 5% of tech leaders women? If it's working, if where reform is happening, why are still only 5%? Why are only 14% of women, as this report shows, in science, engineering, and technology? Right? Why?
I think to look at any leadership role, Manish, there has to be at least 4 to 5 years in the making.
And 20 years, Munira, 20 years. Leadership pipelines take 20 years to build. So, as we see often.
But if you look at the mid-segment, Priya, so let's say, for example, if we talk about just 14%, if you look at the mid-segment, at the first level entry managers, we are close to about a 26%, whereas if you look at the pipeline availability pool, which is about a 48%, that's the gap that needs to be filled in. So I'm talking about not from the entry level, but if you look at the mid-segment to moving to leadership roles, where the push is required. Largely, that's where we need to kind of create more mentorships, more upskilling, more unbiased approach to kind of look at it. I think right now, what India is facing is the bigger problem of having at least about a lot of population between the 40 to 44% of age, criteria if we talk about. That's the age criteria, or that's the middle segment. which either has gone through various bumps, and during their journeys. And that's where the drop-off ratio, or rather the second innings, really looks more difficult, or kind of had not had those kind of opportunities, which we have today. So that's where you need to look at encouraging more collaborative skills, more approachable. Like, for example, what are we doing about the PLI and the incentive schemes on female apprentices? That's something that the government has already introduced, but we are not making it in use. So it's a lot to be done in the making. In case if we need to shift the next 20 years, we need to start now. And
I wanted to pause here because Priya, are you implying that this grass grows at night while we sleep, and if we wait 20 years, then this 5% will be 40? And second, can you respond to Munira's implication that women need a little bit more help in collaborative skills relative to men who have already done it, and that's why they're what do you mean by that?
I'll respond to the second one, but I'll come to that.
Yeah.
I think if I go back,
Yeah.
I joined the workforce, to almost 3 decades back, and when I see the shift that has happened since then, in terms of women leaders, in terms of women who are leading organizations in CXO roles, I think it's been dramatic. So if I look at the problem in terms of half empty, half full, I'm an optimist by nature, and I would prefer to look at the half full part of it as well. And I think, there has been a huge shift that has happened in terms of women staying in the workforce and then therefore, moving into leadership roles. Much more needs to be done. I'm not saying that the grass will grow automatically. It won't. And which is why I've been quite clear about, the 2-3 things that I'm kind of prescribing as an RX for organizations to do, right? Which is gender agnostic, flexibility, employment contracts of different types, etc. But I think we need to recognize that, that pipelines take time to build, and they are, sometimes 10, 15 years, 20 years, to build. We need to recognize that as a data point, right? It's not going to happen overnight, unless we've done all the pieces in that supply chain properly over the last few years. I absolutely do not, agree that there's anything more that women need help with in terms of either, with networking or with collaboration. What is important is for them to be able to stay in the workforce. If they stay in the workforce, I have not the least doubt that they will rise to their full potential and take their place in CXO roles as leaders of industry. I have not the least doubt about it. The problem is that they step off because of gender-based, because of child elder care, all of those issues, coming back in. And of course, they will mention that she made that shift back in, which is fantastic, and full credit to you, Deval. But not everybody manages to do that, well. So, sometimes it's also that inertia. You've been off, come back, the change takes a little more, but if you're able to keep people in the workforce, then the door is a little bit open, you can kick it open much more. So that's where I firmly, come from. And as I think Ruth Ginsburg said, that we don't want quotas, we want people to take, their knee off our neck, so to say. We'll do pretty well on it.
So what would explain the gender pay gap? Is it bigotry, or is it the child break? Deval? What explains the gender pay gap? And if there is one, there is a huge one in the US. It's not as much in India, funnily, in the formal sector as it is in the US. But what, in your thought, explains the gender pay gap? Is it just the break and therefore you get back on? Or is it the different professions? Women are overrepresented in teaching and nursing, and those don't pay as well as some of the other professions, as factories, actually. Teaching and nursing don't pay as well as factories. So is it the different sectors? Is it the break, or is it just bigotry?
I wanted to say something, Manish, before I answer this question, because it kind of relates to this question too. And it was something that I want added to Priya's point. While we've been externalizing the labor participation problem, the female labor participation problem, let's internalize it. Do women really want to work? Do really women want to get out of the comfort zone of their homes and take that extra effort to ensure that they upskill and get into the market and get a job? do women generally end up, Manish, on this constant guilt trip of, do I need to go? Who will take care of my children? Who will take care of my family? And that also becomes a binding constraint to why she doesn't go out in the market and seeks a job. And that also, in a way, makes her underconfident to ask for the money that she wants to ask. It kind of plays into it. The fact that she's unsure already, she knows she has somebody in the house who can be the breadwinner, who is till now providing pretty well. So the fact that I genuinely believe, Manish, the bigger problem is, one, she doesn't know that she's underpaid. Two, she doesn't go and ask that she wants the same level of money. And that is also causing the pay parity, or the reason for the pays not being at the same levels. Of course, I second you when you're saying, is it because she takes a break? Yes, it does happen. She's taken a break. She doesn't have continuity, and that is going to play on her skills. I mean, the world moves way fast for her to catch up in a year or two. So that is going to become a concern and an issue. But for me, the problem is a little more internal than external. And that is something that women together need to think upon and kind of work towards to ensure that they get what they deserve in the market.
So I'm gonna focus on the external problems because I have no experience of the internal problem. Yeah. So I want both of you to respond to Deval, because I think that what are the sources of this pay gap, and do you agree with Deval that you have to take some blame for it?
No,
I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I think there's there is this general feeling that, women don't negotiate well when they have to ask for their money and they have to ask for the next role. In my experience over the last, 3 decades, I can tell you plenty of men also who don't do that, right? So I think it's this whole thing that, women follow the stereotype where they are not assertive, they don't know how to negotiate for themselves. I'm not really very sure whether that's the truth. I can tell you, plenty of men who also, are a little kind of circumspect. They believe that if they do their job well, the rewards will come and so on and so forth. And I've seen plenty of women who are extremely assertive and really negotiate hard and make sure that they get their next role and so on. I'm not entirely convinced that there's a gender linkage, to this, so that's where I come from. On that, I think the gender parity is explained much more if you were to do the divide in terms of, really gender. When people say gender pay parity, they think for the same job you're paying the women less. That's, much lesser. I mean, I don't think there's been enough research into that per se, certainly in the Indian context. I'm not so sure that that's, the prevalent problem that we're talking about. Of course, I am restricting myself to, corporate environment. I'm not talking about unorganized, informal, where there may be a real issue of some of those. But I'm not sure it's a gender issue that women don't know how to negotiate for themselves and don't ask for the big breaks. I think that happens equally. Women do. There are plenty of women who are assertive. There are plenty of men who, wait for the good work to be rewarded. Munira, sorry. Munira?
I think I'll agree with Priya. In fact, women are hard negotiators, in my opinion, because when they can manage the entire monetary aspect of a household, who better than them can kind of do this when they are out in the field force workforce. That's one point. It's more to do with definitely whether we are doing an apple-to-apple comparison or what are we comparing to. So, for example, let's say we do have a lot of women occupying spaces in corporate offices, design roles, or which are more, office-based. The pandemic, we have more opportunities open to kind of do remote and hybrid working. But what percentage of the population of women are occupying roles in your field force? Where, for example, if I have to look at the areas where you need hardcore field expertise or production, manufacturing expertise, we still have a lot of less contribution of the women workforce there. So hence, not sure of what kind of a gender pay gap that we're talking about, unless we do an apple-to-apple comparison. So in my opinion, I kind of don't agree with Deval, but yes, to a certain extent, there are high probabilities that women also are kind of, a lot of ones are kind of in the area of having a pre-assumption of being okay with what is given. So that's a behavioral nature, which is kind of saying that because you're a woman, and that basically comes from the culture dynamics, in India. So that's something that is now changing a
so
lot.
Let me frame it then differently, Priya. Do multinationals are better work environments for women than Indian companies? Are big companies better than small companies? I mean, do you think there is a vector which in just corporate India, and I'm not talking about the informal sector, are there better work environments than others based on ownership, based on size, based on are South Indian companies better to work than North Indian companies? I mean, clearly Bangalore's a better place to live than Delhi for women, but by all crime statistics. And so would you be able to think, or no, it's just, this is unique and every company is different?
I think I would like to stay away from broad brushing, organizations into buckets, saying that if they are MNCs, they are more likely to, and if they are Indian organizations, they are more likely to. I would like to stay away from that. Any organization which is, creating a safe space for women, and particularly with reference to POSH and so on, and also having, opportunities in terms of, being more, as I said, and this is not necessarily for women, but I'm saying more flexible in terms of their orientation. It's a leadership quality that happens. It's not really linked to ownership or size or, MNC or Indian. I would really, I would state that. And I would hesitate to be drawn into bucketing them on the basis of Indian or multinational ownership, or not.
You want to cop out too, Deval?
Today I am sitting on the other side most of the time. So I do believe that MNCs take care of female employees way differently than Indian companies. I do believe that their thought world is more multinational, more international in how they want to support women and how they perceive the kind of effort women are putting into their organization as compared to Indian organizations. And again, I will go back to my first thought that it's cultural. It comes as the normal thing to do for us. It is not something that we even consider as an issue at times, and that is why, in hindsight, everything sounds normal to us. So no, I do believe that Indian organizations need to work way harder and much harder, because we have blinders when it comes to how we take care of the women in our organization, and we, as a matter of fact, I feel that we are way more strict on our women than multinational companies are, and how they rate their performance, how they look at how they perceive the kind of work that they do, and the expectations from these employees is far different as compared to the expectation of employees in Indian organizations.
Munira, do you want to generalize like her? Because some comments are already talking about the dangers of generalization, but I did bait people, so I'm asking you, what is your thought?
In my view, Manish, the choice and the preferences that any woman makes towards an organization, be it Indian or multinational, it's basically to suit her comfort. So how the choice is being made, that is irrespective of whether the organization is Indian or multinational. It's basically, what am I comfortable with? What are my expectations, and to what extent these expectations are kind of being met? And we have a series of examples if we look at the past history where we have had women comfortably working with Indian organizations because they had an unstructured approach towards timing, leaves, and it was more of an informal communication saying that I'll not be there tomorrow, and that was happily acceptable as well. Also, on the other side of it, we have organizations which could be either multinationals or Indians, which have a very strict approach to work, timings, and kind of the tasks that need to be completed. So it all depends on a choice at my level that I make with an organization, and both can offer equally benefiting to a woman employee and a male employee, because I think now organizations really do not differentiate in terms of whether it's an Indian multinational or it's a multinational by themselves. It's about how they are able to contribute and make the lives of their employee more meaningful, more better, more balanced. That's my...
I mean, I would submit that the single biggest indicator of women-friendly workplaces is women in leadership positions. I mean, I think that the more cognitive, just like most creative organizations have cognitive diversity, so the more women you have in leadership positions, the more likely, at least you are to have, some cognitive diversity on that decision. But let me step back on something more, because it is a consumer in some sense. It's a phenomena in the world which happened, but it obviously was driven by workplace. What do you think? Do you think the net impact of the Me Too movement has been positive, Priya, on workplaces, or has it had any impact, the Me Too movement, or was it just what's the fireflies?
Yeah, there's been a lot of coverage of Me Too, and lots of famous personalities who have been called out and kind of held to account for what they may have done. I think from an organization perspective, our entire legislation around POSH was even earlier. It predated the Me Too movement. Yes. And if you ask me, in corporate India, I wouldn't say that it's been impacted by Me Too. There's been discussions around it and so on and so forth, but the effort to create, maintain, strengthen safe workplaces predates it and will continue long after Me Too also kind of becomes another. See that as being a game changer, because I think that effort was there even earlier.
Deval?
I think in some parts it has helped, but in some parts it is not really helpful, Manish. I think it has made men extremely conscious, to a certain extent scared, to work in organizations where there are more women, whether they are working as bosses, whether they are working as peers, whether they are working as a member of their team. I believe, like Priya said, that while it was way more celebrity driven, it scared the common man. And when I say man, I mean the gender man. And it did become an issue in certain places for the fact that people started doubting the whole movement. The people would rather stay away from a woman than get into a mess-like situation. So I am at a 50-50 when it comes to this movement as to how much it has helped. I do believe it has helped celebrity and maybe Hollywood and places where it is at the top, but I don't think at the ground it has really helped much.
Munira, do you have any thoughts, or do you want to pass?
I think, Manish, Indians symbolize celebrities a lot, be it men or women. Even if it has not contributed or not made any needles move, but surely it became a topic of discussion, which means I can openly talk to you about it. I can discuss with you. I can discuss it in a group, and that itself becomes a kind of movement, so that tomorrow, in case if I need to, then I don't hesitate in speaking up to any male colleague about it. I think that's the difference.
So, Priya, you're the oldest among all three of them, and what would you advise to a fresh IIM graduate? I mean, what do you know now about being a woman in the workplace, or what would you have done different, if at all? What would your advice be to a 25 or 20-year-old or maybe 16-year-old MBA that you were?
I wouldn't be so presumptuous as to advise. So two things.
No, well, what have you learned?
Kids are very smart
looking back.
Yeah,
what have you learned looking back?
Would I do anything differently? Probably not. So I don't have any huge regrets about my career. I'm very happy with the fact that I chose the function, I chose the organizations, I've had great mentors and people who have supported me. So I wouldn't do anything differently from that perspective. I think for all youngsters, and I think I say this as much to my children as I would to somebody who's just coming out of an institution and starting their career. Do what you enjoy. Be in a place that do really and commit yourself to that. If you do what you enjoy and you commit yourself to that, there's nothing that can stop a woman, a man, or anyone really from achieving their fullest potential. The rest of it falls in place. You will, nothing is, and we all know that, right? I mean, nothing is as simple as it seems. There are no, easy, straight answers every time. But as long as you are committed to whatever it is that you're following in terms of your passion, you'll find your way around it. So, that's really, I'm not, as you can see, I'm a little low on giving advice to people.
So since I can't ask you that question, Deval, if you were the Prime Minister, what is the one law you would pass which you think would help women in the workplace? I mean, we have
question,
Manish.
I'm going to do exactly what I said. I'll pass a quota system for 50% deployment of women everywhere and anywhere. For sure.
Okay.
I'm serious about that. I do believe that is the need of the hour. And I do believe that will change a lot of things in the country and for the country.
Munira, you?
I think, Manish, for me, one thing works best is in times of how to encourage young girls and women to make their choices and choose the right choices and continue with them. So it's basically to kind of start early, the decision making, the power in, empowering them to do the decision making quite early. That's something that is still, I feel, is a gap amongst women, because most of the times the decision making for you is done by people around you, whether it could be at home, whether it could be in certain places outside, not necessarily the workplace alone, So that's changing, but not to the great extent that we want to look at it. So I think that's one area that we would like to work towards.
Yeah. I've tried to cover all the questions which are there in the chat box. I'm not sure if you all could also sort of take a look at them. But Priya, there's a question which is quite clear. Do women need to make a choice between child and careers? I mean, is that really even a fair choice, or?
Yeah, my point is that people can. It's not as if working, is making someone superior, or not working is making someone superior. I think the ability to access and have choice is important. And of course, one could go into a philosophical debate about, when are we truly free and when are my choices really free? But I'm saying, keeping that philosophical discussion aside, women should be able to take that independent call. It's not about one being better or worse. I absolutely, my mother was a homemaker. I hold her in as much respect as I would a CEO, of an organization. But it's about making sure that women have the choice, men have the choice to follow what they want. If a man wants to stay at home and bring up his children, he should be able to do that without thinking that society is going to say, why aren't you the main provider, and so on. If a woman wants to work, she should have the access and the ability to continue to be in the workforce.
So they're saying like 7 out of 10 women quit or consider quitting their jobs because of the lack of flexibility. And Priya, you've been flagging this internally. So do you think the gig economy is going to help?
That may be one solution, Manish, but I don't think that's the only solution. We shouldn't leave. Corporates shouldn't use, there's the gig economy which might come up and, that will ensure. No, I think we as corporates, we have to be open, to be to our benefit, to be able to tap a wider talent pool. We have to be open to different forms of employment contract, which can be, part-time or outcome-based, which is what the gig economy, largely is. For a certain period of time or extended periods of time, but also flexibility in terms of work from home, work from anywhere, work from office, etc. So I think those two put together would, greatly help organizations as well as society to make sure that everyone achieves their full potential and has choice. To me, that's what a developed society is, where people have choice and the ability to live life by their choices. That's what I would really promote.
So, this is a more controversial question, but, why are you assuming that working in a corporate or making money makes you superior? Now, all three of you should answer this question, because I think there have been 3 major market failures in the world in the last 30, 40 years. One was not pricing carbon. The second was government debt. And the third was not figuring out how to handle unpaid work. because work is work. Now, whether you get paid or unpaid is different from the fact that you do work. And some people will say that I'm choosing leisure, right? There's a very silly economics paper I've seen that India's labor force participation is falling because of the remittance economy and because of women are choosing leisure. I'm not sure that's the reason why women's labor force participation fell. But just can I is this something you think about, that women are smarter than men? Full-time work is highly overrated. Who the hell wants to deal with a workplace? And so I mean, you can answer that question. I'm quite clear that you get more from work than income. You get identity, you get skills, you get a community, you get a sense of purpose. So paid or unpaid is a different. I think the most motivated workers I've often met are people who work for non-profits or who work as volunteers. They are still working, they're not getting paid. But I mean, maybe you should answer this question, that is it a safe assumption, which we have had all through our discussion, that working for a corporate and making money makes you superior than somebody who's not working or who's doing unpaid work, either in home or outside? Maybe start with Priya, then Deval and Munira, and then we'll wrap up.
So I think, if you ask me, I don't think that somebody who is making money is superior to somebody who's choosing to stay at home and commit themselves to the family. But I remember a line in a Hindi story that I read, which is that Samaj Purush Pradhan ya Nari Pradhan nahi hai, Arth Pradhan hai. So the person who makes the money calls the shots. And I think there is some truth in that as well. And therefore, to that extent, financial independence and being able to contribute financially, I wouldn't minimize that part. I think there's a huge thing to it. If you're not financially independent and you're not contributing financially, I think the way you could get viewed does change. It's not my personal view at all, and I'm saying that for the second time. I talked about my mother, who's been a great influence on me, and I think she's, I respect her as much as I would respect any person in the corporate world. But there is something to be said ki Samaj Arth Pradhan hai, and there is something to be said for being financially independent.
So Deval, is the golden rule, who has the gold rules?
Manish, I have done both the roles, and I do take pride in both those roles. I have worked and I've also been a homemaker for a while, and I've enjoyed both of it. But yes, I do second Priya that who makes the money gets the power and is perceived at a very different light. And I would want, as a mother, my daughter to be independent too. I wouldn't want her, while she can do unpaid work, while she can do charity work, while she can do whatever she wants to, but she's got to make the money for her, not for anybody else, for her independence. She doesn't need to be protected by somebody else. She doesn't have to be dependent on somebody else. And that's why I believe the money in the bank is critically important for a woman, and very important for a woman. And also how the world perceives people who make money. Manish, they are looked at differently. The respect that comes with it is different, and that's not going to change. And I don't see it changing for a while. So I do agree that the gold is important.
Munira, I mean, money can't guarantee you happiness. I know poverty can guarantee you misery, but so what is your view of this question?
I think firstly, Manish, for any woman, whether to work at home, whether to work outside, cannot be one after the other or one preceding the latter. It's always together, It's in their DNA to do it together. So be it whether I take a break and sit at home, or I was always sitting at home, or whether I come back to office. For me, it's going to be a continuous pipeline of working at home, working outside. The purpose of working is something to be met. And of course, if that brings in back the financial independence, it's not from proving a point that because I'm earning, I call the shots, and now, that's going to change and I call the shots. But it is more about bringing the entire culture of being together, So equality starts with that, and that itself breaks the biasness at home, saying that the male is going to earn and the female is going to kind of not earn. So there itself, you break the biasness at home, where both contribute to the financial upliftment of entire family. That's the first purpose in reality, and I think we're doing a lot about it. So I don't feel that whether money is going to kind of be the factor, but yes, it definitely brings back, I think, a lot of a submission towards the first level of equality. It starts from home, so that itself, it kind of helps resolve. So it's kind of in the DNA of people.
Yeah.
So for women, whether I'm going to take up a full-time employment or I'm going to take a convenient employment of a part-time or a hybrid, it all depends on her own interest and choice. I don't believe in saying that women usually there should be safe measures given to women, or should we only look at comfortable jobs given to women. We have so many women today in the most difficult jobs, in field jobs, in jobs which are while the percentage is less, but it is their choice to be there. They're aware about it. It's their choice to be there, and I think society is respecting that.
Yeah. I think that we will intervene, or we will change the world at three levels, right? One is at the society level, one is at the firm level, and one is at the individual level. And I think the two most important ways to do that will be experimentation and role models. I think that there are a number of experimentation going on in different firms in India, big ones, small ones, startups, established ones, all over the place. And I think that will obviously catalyze some sort of super cycle in women's labor force participation. But the most important one is role models. Maya Angelou used to say the universe isn't made of atoms, it's made of stories. Stories matter much more. And I think we have a lot more stories. We have a lot more role models, just like the entrepreneurial role model has changed from somebody who used to indulge in regulatory arbitrage and hang out in Delhi. Now you have startup entrepreneurs, which, is catalyzing a super cycle of entrepreneurship. I think a number of women leaders their role models are now able to, as I tend to agree with Priya that the pipeline is much stronger than the current reality. So, if we wait 20 years, I think many things will change. Obviously, we can't just wait 20 years. We have to change society, we have to change firms, and we have to change individuals. But there's a lot of, I think, whether it is POSH, whether it is skill development, whether it is financialization of the economy, whether it is urbanization, which we did not discuss because cities tend to be more fertile habitats for women's labor force participation. I think formalization, because formal enterprises tend to be more fertile habitats. Education, anyway, you guys are covered, right? More than 50% of lawyers in India are now in law school, are women. More than 50% of people in medical schools in some places are women. Obviously, engineering and other places there is unevenness, but 15% of Indian pilots are women. Only 5% of pilots in the US are women. So there are, obviously, that was a very specific intervention which came from Indira Gandhi in 40 years ago, and has had a long shadow because of the Raebareli Academy, which had quotas. They also, that really did work in pilots. So we will give you that one. So, but I think, manzil milegi bhatak ke hi sahi, gumrah to wo hain jo ghar se hi nahi nikle, as Ghalib used to say, right? There will be a lot of experimentation, but at least I think Indian society is much more aware of this issue. I think Indian legislators are more. I think Indian corporate leaders are more aware. And obviously Indian men and women are very different in their perception of what is work, what is fairness at work. And so I think I'm quite optimistic about the next 20 years being very different from the last 50, the last 75, and for sure different than the last 200, which were really disastrous from women's perspective. But thank you all. I mean, you are the role models or the stories that Maya Angelou talks about, and hopefully the young people will recognize themselves in you and the possibilities. So good luck, and thank you for the discussion. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Manish.
Thank you, Manish.